Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are diving into a story that shook the galaxy. The Galactic Council thought they controlled everything until humanity quietly cut all diplomatic ties. No threats, no explanation, just silence. And suddenly the Council starts to panic. Let's see how humans reshapes galactic politics and reminded everyone they can be never controlled.
The day humanity disappeared from galactic politics did not begin with alarms or explosions. It began with silence. At first, no one noticed. Human ambassadors had always been punctual, but sometimes they were late by minutes or hours, especially when disputes dragged on. So when a scheduled council session began without the human delegation present, the chair simply moved on. The meeting continued as usual, filled with arguments, accusations, and power games. No one imagined that this small absence was the first sign of something much larger. By the next cycle, the human seats were still empty. Messages sent to the human embassy received polite automated replies, stating that officers were temporarily unavailable. Council members joked that humans were being dramatic again. Some said it was a negotiation trick, a way to force attention. Others claimed it was an internal political issue and nothing more. The council had seen protests before. Species came and went, threatened withdrawal, then returned when pressure grew too strong. Humanity, they believed, would be no different. But the silence continued. Human trade representatives stopped attending economic summits. Joint research stations reported that human scientists had quietly packed their equipment and left during routine supply rotations. On shared orbital platforms, human security teams were replaced overnight by automated systems that followed old agreements but offered no conversation. Even the human news networks that once broadcast cultural exchanges across the galaxy went dark. It was not chaos. It was orderly. Too orderly to be accidental. Inside human-controlled space, decisions had already been made long before the council noticed. Human leadership had spent years watching the same patterns repeat. Promises made by the council were delayed or broken. Smaller species were exploited under complex laws that favored the powerful. Human aid fleets were constantly requested but rarely supported in return. When humans spoke against injustice, they were praised in public and ignored in private. Over time, patience turned into understanding, and understanding turned into resolve. The final vote was not emotional, it was calm. Humanity would no longer participate. No speeches were sent. No demands were issued. No warnings were given. All ambassadors were recalled under standard diplomatic procedure. Every withdrawal followed the rules the council itself had written. That was the part that unsettled those who later reviewed the records. Humanity had not broken the system. It had simply stepped out of it. As days passed, the council began to notice practical consequences. Meetings felt incomplete. Certain discussions stalled without human analysts who were known for cutting through deception with uncomfortable clarity. Disputes between rival species grew sharper without human mediators, who often acted as neutral voices when tensions rose. Trade figures began to shift as human shipping lanes closed to council traffic. Not aggressively, but firmly. Access permissions expired and were not renewed. Attempts to contact human leadership became more direct. Priority signals were sent through official channels. Emergency codes were used. Silence remained. The few replies that did arrive were brief and formal, stating that humanity was undergoing internal restructuring and would resume communication at a later, unspecified time. There was no anger in the words. That was what made them unsettling. Anger could be argued with. Silence could not. Whispers began spreading among intelligence circles. Human fleets were being recalled from joint patrols and regrouped near their own borders. Shipyards within human systems were operating at full capacity, but not for expansion outward. Everything pointed inward. Defensive formations, self-sustaining logistics, independent networks. Humanity was not preparing to attack. It was preparing to stand alone. Some council members dismissed these reports as paranoia. Humans had always been cautious planners. Others felt an unfamiliar tension. They remembered old debates where humans warned that the council relied too heavily on their resources. At the time, those words were seen as complaints. Now they felt like quiet promises. On frontier worlds, non-council species felt the change first. Human relief ships that once responded to distress calls now redirected responsibility to local authorities. Aid was not denied, but it was no longer automatic. Contracts were reviewed instead of assumed. Many worlds realized how much they had depended on human presence without truly acknowledging it. Fear grew, not because humanity was hostile, but because it was absent. Within the council chamber, the tone shifted. Jokes stopped. Attendance increased. Emergency committees were formed to study the human situation. Analysts replayed old recordings of human speeches, searching for missed warnings. They found many statements about fairness, about balance, about consequences. Each one had been politely applauded and quietly ignored. The most troubling discovery came from a junior archivist who compared timelines. Humanity's withdrawal had not been sudden. It had been planned for years. Legal frameworks had been adjusted, redundancies built. Dependencies reduced. Even cultural exchanges had slowly decreased under the excuse of budget limits. Humanity had been loosening its ties carefully, ensuring that when the moment came, nothing would snap loudly enough to cause immediate alarm. That realization sent a wave of unease through the council. This was not protest behavior. This was not rebellion. This was a civilization deciding it no longer needed permission to exist on equal terms. Some council leaders argued that pressure should be applied. Sanctions were proposed, then quietly set aside when economic models showed how badly they would backfire. Others suggested force, but no one could agree on how. Humanity controlled critical infrastructure nodes across multiple regions, many of which the council barely understood. More importantly, there was no clear provocation. Humanity had violated no law. It had simply chosen silence. As the days turned into weeks, one truth became impossible to ignore. Humanity's absence was louder than its presence had ever been. The council realized it had grown comfortable assuming human cooperation. It had mistaken restraint for weakness and patience for obedience. Now, with no arguments to respond to and no threats to counter, the council felt something new and deeply uncomfortable. Uncertainty, because for the first time since humanity joined the galactic stage, no one knew what it would do next. At first, the Galactic Council refused to take humanity's absence seriously. In public sessions, senior delegates spoke with confidence and even humor. They claimed humans were acting emotionally, as they often did when negotiations did not go their way. Some suggested humanity would return once it realized how much influence it was losing. Others said the silence was a weak attempt to gain sympathy. Laughter echoed through the chamber, and official records described the situation as temporary diplomatic tension behind closed doors. However, the tone was very different. Economic reports began arriving from multiple sectors, and they did not match the council's calm statements. Trade flows that once moved smoothly through human-managed routes were slowing down. Shipping costs increased as council fleets were forced to reroute through less stable regions. Insurance rates climbed overnight. Several council-linked corporations reported delays they could not explain. Human systems were not blocking access aggressively, but they were no longer offering the quiet assistance that had once solved problems before they became visible at first. These issues were treated as technical errors. Committees were formed. Investigations were ordered, but every report reached the same conclusion. The systems were working as designed. The difference was that humans were no longer adjusting them to help others. Council diplomats noticed changes in smaller ways too. During negotiations between rival species, no human observers were present. In the past, human representatives rarely spoke loudly, but when they did, discussions shifted. Now, arguments dragged on for days without resolution. Old grudges resurfaced. Minor trade disputes grew into border incidents. Without realizing it, the council had relied on humans as stabilizers, not leaders, but quiet anchors that kept the structure from drifting apart. Intelligence briefings added to the unease. Human fleets that once participated in joint patrols were no longer responding to shared command signals. Instead, they were repositioned near human territory in tight, defensive formations. Ship movements showed discipline and purpose, not fear. Training exercises increased in frequency, but always within human space. It was clear that humanity was not preparing for expansion. It was preparing for independence. Some council members still dismissed the concern. They argued that humans depended too much on galactic trade to isolate themselves for long. They pointed to past crises where humanity had returned after dramatic gestures. But younger analysts challenged this view. They presented long-term data showing that human industries had slowly reduced reliance on external supply chains over decades. Energy, food, manufacturing, even rare materials had domestic alternatives. Humanity had been building a safety net quietly while others enjoyed the benefits. As more data surfaced, laughter disappeared from private meetings. Several member species began to panic openly. Worlds that depended on human medical technology reported shortages. Frontier colonies once protected by human patrols faced increased piracy. Requests for human assistance went unanswered, redirected to council authorities that lacked experience or resources. These species demanded emergency action, but the council had no simple solution. Replacing human systems would take years, not months. The council leadership attempted to project strength. Official statements were released, claiming that humanity's role had always been exaggerated, but internal simulations told a different story. Without human participation, response times to crises increased sharply. Conflict probability rose across multiple regions. Economic stability indicators dropped. Every model showed the same trend. The galaxy functioned, but less efficiently, less safely, and with growing strain. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, the council authorized unofficial envoys to approach humanity through back channels. Former allies, trade partners, and even cultural figures were encouraged to make contact. These attempts were not hostile. They were friendly, curious, sometimes pleading. None succeeded. Messages were acknowledged but not answered. Invitations were received but politely declined. Humanity was not slamming doors. It was simply not opening them. This behavior confused the council more than open hostility would have. There were no ultimatums to respond to, no demands to negotiate. Sanctions were discussed, but advisors warned they would hurt council economies more than human ones. Military pressure was considered, then quietly abandoned when intelligence reports showed how well prepared human defenses were. Every aggressive option carried unacceptable risk. Meanwhile, rumors spread across the galaxy. Traders whispered that humans were building something massive within their borders. Refugees from distant systems claimed to have seen new shipyards larger than anything on record. Some said humanity had formed secret alliances with non-council worlds, offering protection in exchange for neutrality. Others believed humans were simply turning inward, tired of carrying the weight of others. The truth was unclear, and that uncertainty fed fear. Inside the council chamber, trust began to crack. Accusations flew as members blamed each other for pushing humanity too far. Old debates were reopened. Who had ignored human warnings? Who had blocked reforms? Who had benefited the most from human restraint? The unity the council had proudly displayed for centuries began to fracture under pressure. One veteran delegate finally voiced what many had been thinking but feared to say. Humanity had never been under the council's control. It had chosen cooperation because it believed in shared progress. That belief had been tested too many times. Now, humanity was proving a dangerous truth. A partner who chooses to leave is far more powerful than one who is forced to stay. As the weeks passed, the council's confidence collapsed. Emergency sessions became daily events. Sleep-deprived leaders argued over incomplete data, chasing solutions that vanished under scrutiny. Every attempt to predict humanity's next move ended in uncertainty. There were no threats to analyze, no speeches to interpret, no demands to meet. Only silence and preparation. The realization hit slowly but deeply. Humanity's withdrawal was not a tantrum. It was a decision, a calm, carefully planned decision made by a civilization that had studied the galaxy, learned its patterns, and chosen a different path. The council had mistaken humanity's patience for dependence. Now, faced with a galaxy that felt suddenly less stable, that mistake was impossible to ignore by the end of the cycle. One thing was clear to every council member, even those who still spoke proudly in public. The balance of power had already shifted, not because humanity had acted, but because it had stopped acting for them. And the longer the silence lasted, the more terrifying that absence became. Rumors about humanity's actions began quietly at first, whispered in dark corridors, in taverns on distant colonies, and in the private chambers of council members. Traders and messengers brought tales that seemed almost unbelievable. Human fleets, they said, were no longer patrolling joint territories or attending routine conferences. Instead, they were moving purposefully within human space, reorganizing in ways that suggested careful planning and strategy. Ships that were once seen transporting goods across the galaxy were now diverted to domestic ports, where massive shipyards worked tirelessly, churning out vessels that were both functional and advanced beyond what outsiders had imagined. No one knew exactly why humans were doing this. Some assumed it was preparation for war. Others whispered that it was a demonstration of strength, a silent warning to anyone who dared challenge them. Yet the truth was even stranger. Humanity was preparing not for attack, but for self-sufficiency and independence. Small species that had previously relied on human aid began noticing the changes first. Medical shipments arrived later than expected. Food supplies were rerouted, and protection from human patrols no longer reached frontier colonies on time. The gap left by human absence caused immediate ripple effects. Pirates and opportunists began testing the limits, exploiting the vacuum. Civil disputes flared up in regions where human mediation had once kept tensions low. The council tried to step in, but without human intelligence and logistics support. Their efforts were clumsy and often counterproductive. Every failed attempt to restore order reminded the galaxy just how deeply it had relied on humans. Meanwhile, the council's intelligence agencies reported strange patterns in human systems. Humans were establishing secure networks, redundant communication channels, and rapid response protocols, all without interference from outsiders. Their planet-based factories and orbital shipyards operated at maximum efficiency. Every detail, from resource allocation to training exercises, was optimized for independence. No one could understand the full scope of the preparations, and the lack of explanation only heightened the sense of unease. Analysts concluded that humanity was building a self-contained infrastructure capable of sustaining itself indefinitely, capable of weathering any external disruption, yet doing so without threatening any other species. It was a paradox. Humans were strengthening themselves quietly, and in doing so they were frightening the entire council. Speculation ran wild across the galaxy. Some believed humans were forming secret alliances with non-council species. Refugees claimed they had been contacted by emissaries who offered protection or trade deals on neutral terms. There were whispers of new treaties and pacts, but none of these claims could be verified. Every attempt by the council to investigate ended in dead ends. Humanity had mastered the art of remaining invisible while actively reshaping the balance of power. Their silence was not a weakness. It was a tool that kept the Council and neighboring species off balance, unsure of what might come next within human territories. Life continued with unusual calm. Citizens knew of the decisions made by their leaders, but there were no public declarations or alarms. Resources were managed carefully, production schedules adhered to, and fleets maintained in perfect order. Humans went about their daily routines: research, education, trade within their own systems, yet all activity had purpose and foresight. Every move was part of a larger plan that outsiders could only speculate about. This calm, ordered behavior contrasted sharply with the growing panic outside human space. Where the Council saw uncertainty, humans saw preparation. Where the galaxy saw risk, humanity saw control. The Council struggled to respond. Internal divisions widened as members argued over the best way to handle the human situation. Some suggested sending envoys with gifts and apologies, hoping to coax humans back into cooperation. Others advocated sanctions or threats, arguing that force might remind humans of their dependence. Every option seemed inadequate. Diplomacy had failed because there was nothing to negotiate. Aggression was risky because intelligence suggested humanity was prepared for defense, not offense, but could respond decisively if provoked. Fear and frustration replaced the public confidence that leaders had shown just weeks earlier as panic spread. Even allies of the Council began questioning their loyalty. Worlds that had long depended on human trade or protection started building their own defensive capabilities, fearful of being left exposed. Private security contractors, engineers, and merchants were recruited in haste to fill the gaps. Some species began hoarding resources, anticipating shortages. The very stability that the Council had relied upon for centuries began to crumble. All because humans had chosen a path of quiet withdrawal. It was not an aggressive act. It was a decision to act independently. That choice had unintended consequences that no one had anticipated. Council chambers were filled with endless debates. Advisors presented projections, models, and simulations, but none could predict human behavior. Every scenario assumed humans would respond if provoked, or return when called upon. Every scenario was wrong. The one constant was that humans did nothing not out of defiance, but because nothing required a response. Their independence was both the problem and the solution, leaving the Council unable to act effectively. The paradox of non-action became a weapon, one that no Council member had anticipated and none could counter. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens across the galaxy became aware of the change as stories spread. Humans had always been respected for their ingenuity, discipline, and moral clarity. Now, their absence highlighted those qualities in a way that left a mark on everyone who had interacted with them. Traders, scientists, and explorers reported gaps in services, longer delivery times, and failed negotiations. Refugees and settlers noted the absence of human presence in their daily lives. The world had changed in subtle but undeniable ways, and people everywhere felt the consequences of humanity's choice to step back. Even within Council leadership, fear became widespread. Old rivalries flared as blame was assigned. Who had underestimated human foresight? Who had ignored early warnings? Who had assumed humans would always remain cooperative? The debates were heated, filled with recriminations that did nothing to restore confidence. Analysts warned that continued mismanagement could lead to larger conflicts, potentially destabilizing regions far beyond the Council's immediate control. The Council had inadvertently given humanity a quiet but absolute form of power, the power to be missed, to create dependency, and to force others to act without issuing a single command. Amid this confusion, humanity continued its preparations without interference. Their research stations conducted experiments on energy efficiency and defensive systems. Shipyards tested new hull designs and propulsion methods. Education and training programs expanded to include specialized military and civilian leadership curricula. Every move was deliberate, efficient, and almost invisible. Humans were not seeking attention. They did not need to display their strength. Their strength was inherent, built over generations, and now fully prepared to function independently. The Council attempted one final set of measures: secret envoys, back-channel communications, and discreet offers of cooperation. These were met with politeness, but no engagement. Humanity acknowledged receipt of messages, but their actions never deviated from their quiet plan. No outward hostility, no overt warning, no grand display, only preparation, observation, and the calm certainty of a civilization that knew its own value and independence. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity's withdrawal was far more powerful than its presence had ever been. It created uncertainty, fear, and instability without a single act of aggression. Diplomacy, negotiation, and intimidation all failed against the quiet confidence of humans preparing for self. The Council realized too late that they had mistaken humans' cooperation for weakness and restraint for dependence. Humanity's silence was now louder than any words, and the galaxy was beginning to understand just how serious the consequences of that silence would be.
Let's pause here for a moment. Humanity's silence is not weakness, it's pure calculation. The Council laughed at first, but humans are quickly repositioning fleets, expanding research and distributing trade routes. They are not threatening war, they are showing control through restraint. That's what makes humans uncontrollable and dangerous. Let's continue the story.
By the time the Council fully realized the scope of humanity's withdrawal, panic had already begun to spread throughout its ranks. At first it was subtle, showing as uneasy glances, whispered conversations, and reports flagged with high priority. But as weeks turned into cycles, it became obvious that this was no ordinary diplomatic problem. Every sector once stabilized by human influence was now showing signs of strain. Border disputes that had previously been mediated by human envoys were escalating. Trade networks that depended on human-controlled shipping lanes were slowing to a crawl. Even species that had prided themselves on independence found themselves struggling without human guidance. The Council, long accustomed to asserting control over galactic affairs, was suddenly realizing that it had become dependent in ways it had never admitted. Emergency sessions were convened almost daily. The chamber, once filled with confident leaders discussing policy and strategy, now echoed with arguments, accusations, and rising panic. Older delegates admitted in private that they had underestimated humanity. They had thought human patience was weakness, that compliance equaled subordination, but now it was clear that humans had always acted on their own terms, and the Council's attempts to control or predict them had failed entirely. Younger delegates, who had observed human systems more closely in recent years, were the first to point out the depth of the problem. Humanity had been preparing this withdrawal for decades, quietly reducing dependencies and building self-sufficient infrastructure that could function without Council interference. The first sign of real fear came when border conflicts began to increase. Systems that had been under joint protection were now left vulnerable, and opportunistic species immediately tried to exploit the gaps. Pirates moved into sectors previously considered safe, causing economic and security crises. The Council scrambled to respond, but its forces were overextended, uncoordinated, and lacking the technological support that human participation had always provided. Each attempt to restore order was met with partial success at best, and often it only highlighted the Council's inadequacies. The very systems it had relied upon for centuries were now failing in the absence of humans. Trade networks, too, showed signs of collapse. Human shipping lanes had been the arteries of galactic commerce. Without them, delays and bottlenecks spread quickly. Companies and merchants who had once depended on human logistics faced shortages, missed deadlines, and unexpected expenses. The Council's economic advisors proposed emergency plans to fill the gaps, but most were impractical without human cooperation. The panic became visible in market fluctuations, price spikes, and disruptions that affected even the wealthiest worlds. Ordinary citizens across the galaxy who had never thought about human influence began to notice that something essential was missing. They did not know what humans were doing, only that their absence was reshaping life on every level. Meanwhile, Council intelligence tried desperately to understand humanity's motives. Observers reported a flurry of activity within human spaceship yards producing new classes of vessels, training exercises increasing in frequency and sophistication, and logistical networks expanding to cover every territory without outside help. Humans were not aggressive. There were no mobilized fleets threatening Council holdings. Yet every action suggested that humanity was preparing for any eventuality. A silent power built meticulously and efficiently. Analysts called it preparation without provocation, and no one in the Council had ever encountered a civilization that wielded influence simply by organizing itself quietly. As rumors spread of possible alliances between humans and non-Council species, uncertainty grew. Some claimed humans were recruiting neutral planets as partners, offering protection and trade deals on their own terms. Others suggested that humans were simply focusing inward, ensuring that no external force could ever compromise them again. Nothing could be confirmed, and every new rumor intensified the Council's anxiety. For the first time, member species began doubting the authority and control of the Council itself. A civilization that had always believed in its power hierarchy was now faced with the reality that one member could act independently, disrupt systems, and remain untouchable, all without lifting a weapon. The Council's leadership became fractured. Meetings descended into heated arguments. Some delegates called for immediate contact, offering apologies and concessions in hopes of coaxing humanity back. Others urged force, suggesting military demonstrations or threats to reassert control. Every proposal was met with skepticism, as intelligence reports indicated that any aggressive action could be dangerous. Humanity had built defenses quietly, and though no attack was planned, their capabilities were sufficient to repel any incursion. Diplomacy had failed. Threats were risky. The Council was trapped in indecision, paralyzed by its own miscalculation. Internally, the situation worsened as species within the Council began blaming each other. Who had ignored early warnings of human withdrawal? Who had underestimated the humans' planning and foresight? Long-standing rivalries flared as members sought someone to blame for the instability now spreading across the galaxy. Arguments were no longer about policy, they were about survival. Analysts warned that continued disorder could trigger larger conflicts, with no guarantee of containment. Every failure reinforced a single, terrifying truth. Humanity had never needed to act to exert influence. Its absence alone was now a force the Council could not control. Across the galaxy, ordinary worlds experienced the effects of human withdrawal in real time. Colonies once protected by human patrols saw increased attacks from pirates and hostile species. Supply chains that had depended on human logistics faltered, leaving essential goods delayed or unavailable. Scientists and engineers accustomed to joint projects found themselves isolated, forced to find new methods or abandon research. The absence of humans, who had always been stabilizers, created not chaos but instability that grew steadily, imperceptibly, and inevitably. Without intervention, the galaxy was sliding into a state of uncertainty that no one could reverse. The Council's attempts to reassert control only highlighted its dependence. Emergency committees were formed, simulations run, and advisors sent to advise on contingency measures. Yet each action revealed just how reliant the Council had been on humans. Efforts to fill gaps in logistics, security, and diplomacy were slow, inefficient, and costly. The Council realized, painfully, that humans had quietly become indispensable not through domination, but through competence, foresight, and reliability. The irony was cruel. The very civilization the Council had underestimated was now proving that absence could be more powerful than presence. At the same time, humans continued their preparations quietly, without provocation or warning. Shipyards produced vessels that combined advanced technology with extreme efficiency. Research stations focused on energy, defense, and communications that ensured self-sufficiency. Training programs expanded to cover leadership, logistics, and strategy. Human society was reorganizing itself to be fully independent, capable of defending its interests, supporting its colonies, and thriving without outside interference. Every move was deliberate, calm, and precise. While the galaxy panicked, humans operated with clarity, efficiency, and certainty. Council leaders realized the stark truth. Humanity's withdrawal was not rebellion. It was not aggression. It was a deliberate decision to act independently, and in doing so, to force the galaxy to confront its dependence. Every threat, every diplomatic maneuver, every attempt at negotiation had failed. Humans had acted without confrontation, without announcement, and without malice. Their power was inherent, built through decades of preparation and foresight. The Council had not lost control because of war or betrayal. It had lost control because humans chose not to be controlled. Fear had replaced confidence in every council chamber. Emergency sessions continued, but no solution seemed viable. Every region of the galaxy experienced ripple effects, from economic disruptions to security concerns. Allies began questioning the Council's ability to manage the galaxy. Trade, diplomacy, and peacekeeping, all areas previously stabilized by human cooperation, were now in jeopardy. Humanity had reshaped the balance of power without firing a single shot, without issuing a single threat, and without breaking a single law. The Council realized too late that the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was not military might or political. Maneuvering it was human choice, exercised calmly, deliberately, and independently. In the end, the Council understood the terrifying reality. They were no longer in control. Humanity had simply chosen to step away, and in that choice it had become unstoppable. The galaxy waited in a tense, uneasy silence, not knowing what humanity would do next. For weeks, months, perhaps even longer, every system felt the absence of human presence. Traders, diplomats, soldiers, and scientists all sensed it. The Council had become frantic, sending messages through every channel they could think of. But humanity remained calm, deliberate, and unresponsive. No fleet appeared in threatening formation. No emissary arrived with demands or ultimatums. Instead, humanity seemed to watch and wait, their actions invisible but unmistakably purposeful. Their silence had become a force, creating tension and uncertainty across every star system. Then, the transmission came. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced before. The message was simple, concise, and delivered through every communication network simultaneously. There were no threats, no grand displays of power, no political maneuvering, just words, spoken clearly and calmly, and addressed not to one species or another, but to the galaxy as a whole. We have chosen independence. We will no longer participate in systems that do not respect our principles. We will not conquer. We will not interfere. But we will remember every slight, every action, every choice. The effect was immediate. Council chambers erupted in disbelief. Leaders stared at the screens and listened to the calm human voices, unable to fully comprehend what had been said. Analysts ran simulations, trying to find hidden meanings, but there were none. The message was not a threat. It was not a warning in the traditional sense. It was a declaration. Humanity had made a choice, and it would not be swayed. The most powerful civilization in the galaxy had chosen restraint, self-rule, and independence, and nothing the Council could do would change it. The calm tone of the message was what terrified many. There was no anger, no revenge. Humans were not seeking control, conquest, or retaliation. Yet, despite this, the very clarity and certainty of their choice made it clear that any attempt to challenge humanity would be met with unyielding resolve. The message did not provoke fear through aggression. It created fear because of certainty. Humanity had planned carefully, prepared thoroughly, and now stood ready to defend its independence without needing to prove it through violence. Across the galaxy, smaller species felt the impact almost immediately. Many had relied on human aid, technology, and protection. The transmission was not directed at them specifically, but they understood the implications. Humans were leaving systems that depended on them, withdrawing support quietly but absolutely. For some, it was a shock. For others, it was a moment of clarity. The age of human guardianship had ended. Societies began scrambling to adjust, forming new alliances, reinforcing borders, and reevaluating their priorities. Some feared the worst. Others realized that humanity's independence might allow new opportunities. Free from the interference of a larger council. In the council itself, panic reached a peak. Leaders tried to respond to draft statements, to summon envoys, but it was too late. Humanity had made no errors, no provocations, no vulnerabilities. Every analysis, every contingency plan, every attempt to regain influence fell short. The council had underestimated human foresight and discipline for centuries, assuming compliance could be taken for granted. They had treated patience as weakness, restraint as obedience, and now faced the stark truth. Humanity had always acted on its own terms, and now it had chosen to step away. The transmission included a subtle but powerful reminder. Humans would remember who had respected their decision, and who had tried to challenge it. This was not a threat of war, but a statement of principle. Every species, every leader, every agent of the council had to understand that while humanity did not seek conflict, it would never forget violations of trust or attempts to control them. In other words, the message left the galaxy in a state of uncertainty that was far more profound than any direct attack could have created. It was the ultimate demonstration of restraint and power combined, a civilization that was capable of enormous influence, but chose not to exercise it aggressively. Within human systems, life continued as before, quietly and efficiently. The transmission had not been an outburst or a declaration meant for spectacle. It was part of a strategy, the final phase of a long plan to secure independence while remaining true to principles of restraint and responsibility. Fleets were positioned to defend human space if necessary, but they were not threatening anyone. Research, education, infrastructure, and logistics continued at full capacity. Humanity had organized itself so thoroughly that the galaxy could see the effects of their choice without seeing humans themselves. Silence and preparation had become their message, and the transmission reinforced it with clarity. The council's reaction was complex. Leaders argued, debated, and blamed one another for failing to foresee human independence. Some proposed sending fleets or envoys immediately. Others argued for patience, fearing that any aggressive action could provoke humans unnecessarily. In every scenario, analysts emphasized the same truth. Humanity was ready, capable, and unshakable. The galaxy was forced to accept that humans were no longer a civilization that could be pressured into submission. They had voluntarily withdrawn, and that choice, simple and calm as it was, carried power far beyond any military force. For ordinary citizens of the galaxy, the transmission was a revelation. People who had grown up with human guidance, protection, or cooperation suddenly realized how much they had depended on humans without fully appreciating it. Traders, explorers, educators, and settlers understood that the systems they had relied on were now operating differently. The absence of humans highlighted both their competence and their discipline. Humanity had built systems that worked efficiently, independently, and with integrity. And now, having made their choice known, the galaxy was left to adapt or face consequences of neglecting that choice. The most remarkable aspect of the transmission was its simplicity. No threats, no dramatic rhetoric, no demands, just a calm statement of principles, backed by decades of preparation. Humanity did not need to show force because its planning, discipline, and independence were already undeniable. The galaxy could see that humans had thought carefully, acted deliberately, and secured their own power quietly. Their message reinforced that their withdrawal was permanent and principled, not reactive or emotional. The council realized that the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity had not declared war, nor had it asked for submission. It had simply chosen to act independently, and the consequences were immense. Systems relied on humans would have to adjust, alliances would shift, and the council itself would be forced to reckon with the reality that a single civilization could refuse cooperation without being punished or controlled. Humanity's decision to withdraw, paired with its calm declaration, had reshaped the balance of power without any aggression, without any threats, and without a single battle. The transmission left a final impression that would last for generations. Humans had reminded the galaxy that power does not always require action to be effective. By exercising restraint, independence, and clarity of purpose, humanity had achieved what the council had never feared, the ability to influence the galaxy not through conquest but through choice. Every leader, every diplomat, and every citizen who understood the message knew the same truth. Humans could not be controlled, and any attempt to do so would be remembered in that moment. The galaxy understood something new and profound. Humanity had chosen self-rule and independence, not as an act of rebellion, but as an assertion of identity. They were not leaving in anger. They were leaving in preparation to be free, to be self-reliant, and to shape their destiny without compromise. And in doing so, humanity had shown the Council and the rest of the galaxy the most powerful lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest force is not action, not weapons, not threats, but the simple and unwavering choice to stand apart and act with clarity, discipline, and principle. The galaxy would never forget that moment. Humanity had spoken, and its calm declaration echoed across the stars. The Council panicked, smaller species re-evaluated their strategies, and every corner of space realized that humans were no longer just participants, they were sovereign, and in that sovereignty, they had already won.
And that's how humanity changed the galaxy without firing a shot. Their calculation, restraint, and independence force, even the Galactic Council respect them. If you enjoy this, like, share, and comments below. Thank you for watching.